young Charlie Chaplin arrives in the United States and quickly rises to become a top movie star within just a few years. However, 3 decades later, he faces a ban and is denied entry into the country. You might wonder what led to this. It would take about an hour to provide an answer. The key point to grasp at this moment, however, is that there is currently no movie star who can rival the popularity of the man in the bowler hat. In 1914, Chaplin makes his debut on screen as the Tramp, which marks his second film. At this point, neither Chaplin nor his character is widely recognized. In just 5 years, his films featuring the cane-wielding Tramp will reach every continent on Earth. 3 decades later, it's likely that virtually everyone on those continents will know who Charlie Chaplin is. As an actor, director, screenwriter, producer, and composer all rolled into one, he will release nearly 100 short films and iconic feature-length movies that will profoundly impact both cinema and history itself. Films like The Kid, The Gold Rush, and City Lights showcase a blend of kindness, sentimentality, humor, and innocence. This is how many viewers perceive the actor. Yet, beneath this public persona lies an entirely different individual. Every Hollywood star holds a closet teeming with skeletons. By the early 1950s, Charlie Chaplin's closet is bursting at the seams. He faces accusations of immoral conduct stemming from his many wives and mistresses, and even allegations of sexual slavery. Moreover, he is branded a communist. By the mid-century, such an allegation in the States could jeopardize not just a career, but also one's personal freedom. Ultimately, the movie star is barred entry into the United States. He has journeyed from the slums of London to the pinnacle of cinema, transitioning from a leading Hollywood star to a marginalized creator in exile in Europe. This is the tale of Charlie Chaplin. All right, it's crucial to highlight a key point right away. At the start of the 20th century, cinema as we know it does not exist. Sure, there is technology, and short black and white silent films are made, but they lack color, sound, and often even a cohesive narrative. It's simply a new source of amusement, moving images. There's no guarantee that this entertainment won't fade in popularity and vanish altogether. Additionally, no one views it as an art form or a likely integral aspect of human expression. As a result, during that era, it's rare to find anyone who genuinely aspires to become a movie star. In 1910, a ship docks in New York after its journey from London. Among the passengers is a 21-year-old British theater actor who doesn't yet dream of a future in cinema. Instead, he yearns for his name to be recognized throughout the country. America, I will conquer you. Every man, woman, and child will have my name on their lips. Charles Spencer Chaplin. This declaration reportedly came from the young actor as he stood on the deck of the ship, gazing at the Statue of Liberty. This anecdote was shared by fellow members of the British theater troupe traveling with Chaplin on his tour to the States. While this tale might be more myth than fact, it certainly seems plausible given our hero's larger-than-life personality. In his homeland of Britain, Chaplin isn't quite a star, but he's definitely a recognized theater actor. He is one of the prominent members of the Carnot Touring Company, where performers travel to various cities across the country with their shows. Their program blends elements of circus, comedy, and musical theater. Chaplin's primary talent lies in pantomime. He entertains with humorous sketches where he expertly mimics other people. In doing so, the actor humorously tumbles, loses his trousers, or grapples with his hat. In essence, it's not Shakespeare, but the audience finds it delightful. The troupe's first tour in the States proves to be a hit. Just 6 months later, the actors make their return to America, where a significant event unfolds in Chaplin's life that alters his trajectory entirely. Keystone stands out as one of the most renowned film companies at the dawn of this new medium. The hallmark of Keystone films is the chase sequences, featuring police officers as the main characters. Typically, these films showcase about 10 minutes of non-stop action, with someone running, driving, falling, or engaging in a fight. There's no script, just an initial concept followed by a sequence of improvisations. While it may often appear absurd, it is consistently entertaining, dynamic, and crucially approachable for audiences of all educational backgrounds and social standings. While Chaplin tours across America, one of the key performers at Keystone Studio falls ill. Company representatives spot the young British actor during one of his shows. Captivated by his energetic presence and evident talent for pantomime, acrobatics, and humor, they see potential for him on screen. Chaplin is presented with a contract offering him $150 a week. While today, this amount may seem insignificant, it's important to realize that Chaplin has never earned such money before. Even more astonishing is that just a few years later, his contract will reach $1 million. But let's proceed step by step. By the end of 1913, Chaplin arrives in Los Angeles to start filming for Keystone. At that time, the iconic Hollywood sign has yet to be erected, and Hollywood itself is far from the glamorous image we associate with it today. Keystone Studio ranks among the leading studios in the industry. In truth, it consists of only a few bungalows set in an open field a few kilometers from the city. Nearby, in the fresh air, multiple sets are simultaneously filming different movies. A director shouting directions to the actors, bustling activity all around, the sound of cameras rolling, and musicians performing live. In short, it's the enchanting world of cinema. Given the simplicity of the plot and production elements, film actors resemble little more than puppets. Their performances consist mostly of mechanical actions with a narrow range of exaggerated emotions. According to Chaplin's memories, one of the first inquiries upon his arrival on set was whether he could humorously tumble down the stairs without injuring himself. Thanks to his theatrical background, he could pull it off. Chaplin's initial appearance on screen takes place in early 1914 in a 10-minute short film entitled Making a Living. In this film, he portrays a con artist, a brazen and unpleasant character. There's hardly a trace of the beloved Tramp in this role. Only upon close observation can one detect subtle hints of the renowned character, the nuances of his facial expressions, how he kisses a woman's hand from wrist to shoulder, and ultimately his distinct walk. Yet, all of this is still a far cry from the cinematic hero the world would come to recognize. Nevertheless, these details are crucial. They indicate that Chaplin didn't arrive in cinema with a fully developed character right from the start. Technically, audiences will first see the Tramp Chaplin in his next two films for Keystone. In the short films Kid Auto Races at Venice and The Knockout, Chaplin's character interrupts the filming crew at the racing event in the former. The tramp continually intrudes into the frame. In the latter, the inebriated character Charlie creates chaos for both hotel staff and guests. It's a classic situational comedy rife with amusing and absurd scenarios. While these early efforts by Chaplin in the film industry may not serve as evening entertainment today, they're noteworthy for one reason. Can you guess how much time elapsed between the release of each film? Just a few days. This highlights the swift and ruthless pace of production that characterized the early days of cinema. The studio was producing an average of 3 short films weekly, totaling over 100 films annually. This left Chaplin little time to contemplate the intricacies of his character, which he sought to develop from film to film. Throughout his extensive career, the actor frequently faced inquiries about the origins of the tramp, and his responses varied each time. In one interview, Chaplin mentioned that his inspiration stemmed from characters he observed in his childhood on the streets of London. In another, he asserted that the tramp was born from watching various actors in the theater. Chaplin's son recalled that the distinctive baggy pants came about by chance when he stepped in for a colleague who was significantly larger. It's also important to note that the tramp persona enjoyed considerable popularity in English theater. Each of these explanations likely carries some truth. The only question is their relative significance, but ultimately, that may not even be the main point. In 2 of the first 3 films, we already encounter the cane, the hat, the ill-fitting jacket, and the silly walk, elements that make it appear as a fully realized character. However, it's doubtful that anyone would have remembered Chaplin 5 to 10 years after these films if his trademark had started and ended with just the costume and a series of entertaining movements. Such traits alone could not alter history. The true secret to Chaplin's success will be unveiled later, as he himself will disclose in due course. He will recount much of this journey in just a few short years. Cinema is an art form that requires skilled practice. Have you heard of the 10,000-hour theory? It posits that to be considered an expert or professional in a field, you need to dedicate approximately that amount of time to it. I suspect Chaplin had no knowledge of the 10,000 hours concept. Yet, throughout his first year in the film industry, he works as if not only is he aware of this theory, but has also coined it himself. During his initial annual contract, Chaplin appears in 36 films. Not all feature him as the tramp. He plays a policeman, a villain, and even a woman. However, his experiments with various roles and the audience's responses only solidify Chaplin's belief that he should concentrate on the tramp, and that's precisely what he does. As a result, in 1914, audiences see the tramp donning various roles, including a judge, a waiter, a thief, a lover, a cleaner, a baker, an actor, and a doctor. Chaplin emerges as one of the leading actors at Keystone Studios. His surprisingly swift rise to fame effectively saves him from being let go before his contract ends. Behind his back, colleagues refer to him as that Englishman. He often expresses dissatisfaction with directors, fellow actors, or scripts. For Est, the studio head, the most sensible decision would be to terminate such an employee. Yet, since the profession's inception, producers have primarily been interested in the numbers, and Chaplin delivers those numbers in terms of both viewers and revenue. Capitalizing on this, the actor gains greater influence for himself. Consequently, many films starring Chaplin during his first year at Keystone will also be directed by him. To accomplish this, he meticulously studies every aspect of filmmaking, from acting to editing. Chaplin arrives on set among the earliest and departs among the last. By the end of his first year in the film industry, he comprehends how to operate both in front of and behind the camera. Chaplin resolves that he will never again perform in someone else's film. He will produce his own. By early 1915, Charlie Chaplin, though not quite a star yet, is certainly on the brink of becoming one. The Tramp has already gained considerable recognition among moviegoers. With his rising status comes increasing demands. The actor seeks $1,000 a week. It's worth noting that just a year prior, he earned nearly 10 times less, and that was already a substantial amount. The head of the studio, a man named Seth, informs him that even he doesn't make that much. Charlie replies that it's the name Chaplin, not Sinat, that generates revenue for the studio. Almost immediately, a competing company emerges, offering the actor not only more than $1,000 a week, but also relative creative freedom, larger budgets, and flexible deadlines. Under the new contract, he is required to produce one film every 3 weeks, instead of the previous pace of every 3 days. This shift allows for significantly more time to conceptualize and execute his work. Typically, most films from that era clocked in around 10 to 15 minutes, as this was the length of a single reel of film. The primary drawback of such short durations is the simplicity of the narratives. Complex stories require more time to unfold. Chaplin is fully aware of this. After relocating to the new studio, most of his films run for about half an hour, with the number of takes during scene shoots occasionally reaching 50. Many crew members view this as a waste of film and a sign of a young, unproven star's antics. They fail to recognize that Chaplin is reshaping the trajectory of cinema right before their eyes. Does he fully grasp this himself? Not necessarily. We won't dive too deeply into cinematic analysis. To illustrate Chaplin's key revelation in filmmaking, we need only one film from the 13 he released in 1915. This film is titled The Tramp. At first glance, it appears no different from his earlier works. It's a classic situational comedy. In the opening scene, the hero almost gets struck by a car and tumbles down. In the following scene, he rescues a girl from bandits, humorously stumbling along the way. Grateful for his help, the girl's father offers the Tramp a job on their farm. In this role, he portrays himself as hilariously inept and absurd. The characters repeatedly hit each other on the head or rear and naturally fall in comical ways. In short, it's a riot unfolding on screen. However, in certain scenes, the Tramp interacts with a farmer's daughter. First, he saves her from bandits. Then he protects the farm, and he even assists with milking a cow. In essence, the hero believes there are mutual feelings between him and the girl. But as the film nears its conclusion, something unexpected occurs. The young man, the girl's boyfriend, returns to the farm and expresses his gratitude to the Tramp for his help. Pay close attention to Chaplin's character's reaction. He is filled with disappointment, distress, and confusion. He experiences a complex and genuine human emotion, something that had not been depicted before Chaplin. while audiences had witnessed chases, robberies, gunfire, and other forms of action. They had yet to see subtle, intricate, authentic human emotions that stirred empathy. This is one of the primary reasons why we continue to watch films today. Both the creator of the Tramp and the audience come to truly recognize this effect much later. Yet this does not hinder Chaplin from becoming a genuine star in 1915. The bowler hat, mustache, cane, and distinctive walk evoke an enthusiastic response from audiences not only in the U.S., but also across other continents. The public eagerly flocks to see new films featuring the Tramp. In just a few years in the film industry, 26-year-old Charlie Chaplin becomes a global sensation. However, popularity often has its downsides, a reality Chaplin will fully encounter later. During his early rise, the principal drawback is that the public largely identifies the character of the Tramp rather than the actor himself. Who is he without his bowler hat, mustache, cane, and signature stride? Who is Charlie Chaplin? The landscape of South London at the end of the 19th century is dominated by factories, warehouses, slaughterhouses, and far from glamorous housing. Concurrently, the area's affordability facilitated the rise of numerous entertainment venues, including bars, brothels, and music halls. It was in such a neighborhood that the future global star was born in 1889. At that time, Charles Chaplin's father was a relatively popular music hall performer. Yes, he had a name too. Meanwhile, his mother, Hannah, was also striving to make a mark in theater, though her successes were considerably more modest. By the time Charlie was born, the family already had a 4-year-old son named Sidney. The true paternity of the elder son was somewhat ambiguous, as the mother led a lively personal life. Perhaps her infidelities contributed to her separation from her husband a year after Charles's birth. Hannah's theatrical career never truly gained momentum, and she was perennially searching for side work or a new partner. In the absence of either, Chaplin later recounted that she turned to prostitution. Applying familiar social standards to our family is like putting a thermometer in boiling water, the renowned actor would later state. It's hardly surprising that the single mother and her 2 sons lived in poverty. They rented an inexpensive room and often relied on charitable soup kitchens for their meals. As an adult and successful actor, he developed a fondness for butter and cream, foods he had lacked during his childhood. Perhaps the inadequate nutrition during his early years contributed to his short stature. He stood under 170 centimeters tall with an underdeveloped chest. Hannah was frequently tormented by headaches, and gradually mental health issues began to surface. She would intermittently find herself in a psychiatric hospital, where she could spend months at a time. During those periods, her sons either disappeared into a lodging house or spent nights sleeping on a bench in the park. The grown-up Chaplin found the park unbearable. "My childhood ended at 7 years old," he would later remember. At that point, their mother was once again admitted to a psychiatric hospital for an extended stay, and he and his brother were placed in an orphanage. The positive aspect of being in the orphanage was that the boys had access to relatively adequate food, clothing, and a place to sleep. Moreover, this brief stay would mark the only time in Charles's life when he would receive any formal education, at least learning to read and write. When their mother was released from the hospital, she would take Charlie back with her. However, due to ongoing financial struggles, they often found themselves having to relocate or sleep on the streets again. The future appeal of the cinematic character of the Tramp can be attributed to many factors, one of which is his ability to maintain optimism and keep his head held high in a harsh and unwelcoming world. Chaplin would excel at mastering this skill during his childhood. When it came to survival, Charlie exhibited remarkable resourcefulness. He worked as a barber's assistant, a printer, and even a surgeon's aide. He sold flowers outside brothels and naturally sought to make money on stage by performing dances and pantomimes. All of this was aimed at lifting himself from the societal depths. Chaplin's primary fear for the rest of his life would be poverty. Regarding income stability, the profession of an actor is likely one of the worst options. At the age of 14, Charlie secured his first full-time job in theater, a small role in the production of Sherlock Holmes. Over the next few years, the troupe toured the country, but ultimately, Charlie found himself unemployed once again. By the age of 18, even his brother, who harbored no grand ambitions in theater, was enjoying a more successful career in that realm. It was through Sidney's connections that Charlie became part of the Carnot troupe. For Chaplin, this opportunity served as his theatrical university. He learned pantomime, acrobatics, stage comedy, and various other performance skills. Chaplin soon emerged as one of the troupe's prominent artists, embarking on a tour across the United States. And within a few years, he had risen to global stardom. You can dedicate yourself to improving your craft and achieve a certain level of success, but everything beyond that ultimately hinges on luck. That's an approximate quote from Murakami, if I'm not mistaken. However, the specifics of the quote and its authorship are less important than its essence. Luck will play a crucial role in Chaplin's destiny. He embarked on his film career at a time when this new medium was developing swiftly. Few art forms evolved and gained popularity as quickly as film did in the early 20th century. One of the key factors behind cinema's rapid global expansion was its remarkable accessibility. You might not know how to write, read, or even add 2 plus 2, but when a character comically strikes another on screen, you instinctively recognize the humor in it. Following the conclusion of his second contract and his rise to a new level of fame, Chaplin sought a studio that would provide him with even greater financial rewards and creative freedom. His brother Sidney assisted him in this pursuit, managing the actor's affairs throughout his lifetime. The new contract was unprecedented. A studio named Mutual agreed to pay the actor $600,000 per year. By some estimates, Chaplin emerged as the highest-paid worker in the world. While the pace of film releases slowed, the complexity of their narratives, particularly in terms of storytelling, improved rapidly. Although some of the works remained standard situational comedies, they now featured much more coherent and logical plots. In his finest works from that period, Chaplin advances significantly. A prime example is the film The Immigrant. The story begins on a ship where the tramp and other passengers are voyaging to the United States in search of a better life. At first glance, poverty, illness, hunger, and an uncertain future may not seem like particularly humorous subjects. Yet, these are the central themes of The Immigrant. Gradually, Chaplin uncovers an important truth. Great comedy often stems from deep pain. In his later work, Chaplin would push this principle to the limit and integrate it into his best creations. In The Immigrant, it's entertaining to see the characters share a bowl of soup during rough seas, witness the border guards mock the newcomers, and observe how the protagonist lacks the money to pay for his meal at a restaurant. These scenes resonate effectively because they have been carefully curated. The film's runtime is just over 20 minutes, while the original footage recorded is 20 times longer. Both The Immigrant and other films from this era stand out as some of the best in the actor's career thus far. The studios are eager to offer Chaplin as much money in film as he desires. Under the terms of his next contract, the actor is set to receive $1 million for a year and a half of work. Let's revisit the trajectory of our hero's ascent. 10 years earlier, he was sleeping on a park bench. 4 years prior, he was just beginning his film career, earning $150 a week. Now, at the age of 28, Chaplin has signed a contract worth $1 million for 18 months of work. In a contest for the best representation of the phrase "from rags to riches," Chaplin would be way ahead. Conversely, it seems unusual to expect any other figures. By 1917, Charlie had become the most popular person on the planet, and his lifestyle began to reflect his star status. He acquired a house and hired staff. His assistant ventured to the stock exchange nearly every day with bundles of cash to invest the boss's money, which had no other destination. Rumors circulated that Charlie was involved with prominent figures in high society. In the United States, he was the #1 bachelor. The actor's first serious romance blossomed with his co-star Edna when Charlie offered her a role in one of his films at just 19 years old. At one point, they even contemplated marriage, but the wedding never occurred. Nonetheless, this did not impact the professional relationship between the two actors. In total, Edna starred in the leading female roles in around 30 of Chaplin's films during the early part of his career. One of the primary reasons for their unsuccessful engagement was likely quite straightforward. Family life was simply not on the agenda for the leading film star. As a result, the narrative of his first romantic involvement resembles that of a respectable melodrama. In 1918, while working on a new film, he meets actress Mildred Harris. Chaplin is 29, and Harris is just 16. After filming wraps up, Harris reveals that she is pregnant. Although the actor has no desire to marry, he feels he has no option. Refusing would result in a major scandal. Chaplin arranges a very simple ceremony and rents a new home for his wife and soon-to-be child. However, it later emerges that Harris is not actually pregnant. She may have misinterpreted her symptoms, or it could have been a calculated scheme by the girl's mother to marry her off to a superstar. A month later, it is confirmed that the young wife is indeed pregnant. However, the feelings Charlie once had for her have long diminished. He attempts to spend as much time away from home as possible. In July 1919, the couple welcomes a son, but just 3 days later, the child passes away due to congenital problems. Chaplin begins living separately, and although he and Harris remain formally married, it's clear to everyone that their marriage has ended. Just 11 days after the death of his son, Charlie Chaplin conducts auditions for a role in a new film, working titled The Tramp. It is uncertain how the personal tragedy of the lead actor will influence the film's greatness. However, what we do know for sure is that this movie will emerge as a celebrated masterpiece and one of the pivotal films in Chaplin's career. Its final title is The Kid, and the film is profoundly brilliant. In the story, a mother leaves her newborn child in a car parked next to an upscale house. Two criminals steal the car and abandon the child in the midst of a slum street. There, a tramp finds the boy and raises him as his own son. Their lives, or rather their struggle for survival, unfold through a series of heartwarming and sorrowful events that often strike a humorous chord. The formula for Chaplin's most successful films involves laughing until tears flow and crying until one bursts into laughter. A vivid illustration of this formula is the scene where social workers attempt to take the boy away from the tramp. It begins with a heart-wrenching shot of the weeping child, leading into a humorous chase of the tramp after the car carrying the child, culminating in their reunion, during which the audience sees tears in Chaplin's eyes for the first time. It is clear that Chaplin's skill, particularly as a screenwriter and director, has reached remarkable heights after several years in film. The Kid attains tremendous box office success and an even more significant place in cinema history. Following the release of this film in 1921, many began to view cinema as an art form for the first time. To be honest, among all the older silent black and white films, only a handful can still be revisited today for enjoyment, rather than academic reasons. Most of these works are by Chaplin, including The Kid. During the production of the film, Chaplin officially divorces Mildred Harris, who accuses him of infidelity and mistreatment. Both claims could realistically hold some truth, given the actor's nature. However, it is essential not to overlook the hurt feelings of his ex-wife. Following the divorce, she receives a significant sum of money and a share of the property. For Chaplin, this is a challenging time. The loss of his child and the divorce weigh heavily on the superstar's reputation. Simultaneously, two events from Chaplin's childhood in Britain unfold in his life. He brings his mother to live with him, having previously been paying for her stay at an expensive psychiatric clinic in England. Now, Chaplin purchases her a house in California and hires medical staff to care for her. Another significant moment occurs with his trip to Britain. For the first time since he began his film career, he returns to his native London. Claims of being greeted by throngs of people would be a considerable understatement. While there had been stars in Britain before, Chaplin's arrival signifies a completely different level of fame, an almost godlike stature. His popularity grants him access not only to the hearts of ordinary people, but also to realms that the average person never enters. I'm referring to the elite. Charlie relishes his time among the upper echelons of New York society. He delights in discussing politics, history, and literature, essentially topics he doesn't completely grasp. Chaplin's education barely amounts to even a fundamental schooling. During serious conversations, he often makes blunders, yet his charisma and remarkable ability to craft sentences save him from any awkwardness. Interestingly, those he converses with notice his pronounced British accent, which is not the refined version spoken by English aristocrats, but rather the type prevalent in the working-class neighborhoods of London. In a sense, Charlie is fortunate that cinema is not yet owned by anyone. Riding the wave of success from The Kid and other films, he decides it is time to evolve beyond being just an actor, director, and screenwriter, to also becoming a producer of his own films. Part of this decision arises from conflicts with the studio he was working with. As you may remember, at that time, he was contracted to receive $1 million. According to the agreement, Chaplin was expected to create 8 films within a year and a half, yet he produced 9. However, over the 5 years between The Kid and The Circus, Chaplin consistently prioritized the latter. No major studio will allow the creator complete freedom of action. Chaplin understands this, as do several of the leading Hollywood filmmakers of that era: actress Mary Pickford, actor Douglas Fairbanks, and director D.W. Griffith. Together, the four established their own studio, naming it United Artists. This marks a pivotal moment in the history of the film industry. For the first time, creators have full control over their works. While Chaplin's journey in cinema might seem like a continuous stream of successful projects, that's not entirely accurate. A notable example is his very first endeavor as an actor and director for the new studio United Artists, a film called A Woman of Paris. I doubt any of you have even heard of it. In fact, Chaplin himself will try to forget this project as quickly as possible. With this film, Charlie takes a considerable risk. Firstly, it's not a comedy. Secondly, Chaplin only has a brief cameo, while the lead role is taken by his often collaborating actress, Edna Purviance. Charlie recognizes that she is facing a creative crisis and turning to drinking, and he hopes that a significant dramatic role will help Edna revive her career. A Woman of Paris is not a failure in the grand scheme of films, but it certainly pales in comparison to Chaplin's other works. Edna will feature in 2 more films before ultimately abandoning her profession. Charlie, on the other hand, will return to the Tramp character in his next project, creating one of the greatest comedies in history. The concept for the film The Gold Rush originates from a book. Chaplin comes across the tale of a group of 19th century immigrants who embark on a journey in search of precious metal, only to become stranded in the snowy mountains. They face illness, death, and starvation, with some resorting to eating dogs, their own shoes, and even fellow members of the expedition to survive. In short, it provides excellent material for a Chaplin comedy. The Gold Rush might never have materialized, or at least not in its current form, had Chaplin not established his own studio. Once he could complete a film in just a few days. Now it takes him several years. The Gold Rush is, at that moment, the most ambitious project of the filmmaker's career, featuring expansive landscapes, mountains, snow, and a large cast. The director shoots all the exterior scenes on location in the mountains. Ultimately, only 2 of those scenes will make it into the final film, as everything else will be reshot in the studio using a blend of salt and flour to recreate the appearance of snow. One of Chaplin's challenges is the absence of a script. Today, it's difficult to envision Hollywood beginning film production without a meticulously developed script. However, Chaplin adopts a different approach. He has an idea, a rough outline of scenes, and everything else is worked out during the process. This method typically works for a 10-minute short film, but with The Gold Rush and his subsequent films running an hour and a half or more, it becomes more complex. This aspect of his work, paired with his perfectionism, results in an enormous number of takes. However, let's be clear, the audience in the theater cares little about the struggles of production if what they see on screen is captivating. Even if you haven't seen The Gold Rush, you're likely familiar with some scenes from the film. One of the most iconic moments is the meal prepared from a boot. The tramp and his partner find themselves stranded in a cabin in the mountains with nothing to eat, so they resort to cooking a shoe. This might be one of the most humorous scenes in film history, perfectly highlighting a key trait of the Tramp character, his knack for maintaining optimism in even the toughest situations. Interestingly, the shoes utilized during filming were crafted from licorice. Due to the numerous takes, Chaplin's partner ended up consuming so much licorice that he felt queasy. The final budget for The Gold Rush reached $1 million, an astronomical figure, but it proved to be a lucrative investment. Audiences are treated to an incredible mix of comedy, melodrama, thriller, and horror on screen. The viewers at the premiere cheer and scream with excitement. The Gold Rush ultimately becomes the most successful film in cinema history up to that point. What the audience in 1925 is unaware of is that the main female role, the girl whom the tramp falls in love with, was originally intended for another actress. However, she couldn't take on the role as she became pregnant during filming, with Charlie Chaplin being the child's father. Lita Grey made her screen debut in a small role in the film The Kid, when she was still a child herself. By the time of The Gold Rush shooting, she was just shy of 16. To prevent a scandal, the studio had to officially add 3 years to her age. In the midst of filming, she informs Chaplin that she is pregnant. This situation inevitably recalls déjà vu from the actor's previous marriage, as the girl is once again 16 and Chaplin is twice her age. Once more, she is pregnant, leaving Charlie with no options. According to rumors, Chaplin attempted to persuade her with money to either have an abortion or find another suitor. However, it appears the girl's parents opposed this notion. Regardless, Charlie marries Lita in a shroud of secrecy. Spoiler, the marriage will not endure. Years later, Grey will publish an autobiography and give numerous interviews regarding her marriage to the Hollywood star. She will accuse Chaplin of infidelity, questionable moral behavior, and of indicating from the beginning that their marriage meant little to him, even though they welcomed a son in 1925, who was also named Charles Chaplin. Naturally, the memories of his former wife regarding their troubled marriage are unlikely to be regarded as absolute truth. Nevertheless, certain negative traits of our hero are corroborated by the accounts of acquaintances and colleagues. It is undeniable that Chaplin had numerous affairs, both during and outside his marriage. It's also true that many of his partners were quite young. By the mid-20s, this wasn't a significant issue for Chaplin. However, it was like a ticking time bomb that would inevitably go off, but not just yet. regarding the contrast between the real Chaplin and his on-screen character, Charlie, they are substantial. As the public uncovered more about Chaplin's eventful personal life, Charlie appeared increasingly moralistic on screen. Chaplin is a millionaire, while Charlie is perpetually poor. Chaplin is a workaholic and a perfectionist, whereas Charlie can never keep a job. Colleagues and associates have often portrayed the actor as a tough, demanding, and occasionally ruthless leader. Even his own son would label Chaplin as self-centered. However, this self-centeredness is an intrinsic quality of any creator. The real question is to what degree. Chaplin's toughness and cold demeanor were occasionally softened by kindness, humor, and openness. Perhaps the most fitting description of the actor came from one of his friends. Appreciate any Charlie Chaplin you are fortunate enough to encounter. But don't assume that this is the real Chaplin. There are too many versions. By the end of the 20s, the general public observes a very different Chaplin. Lita files for divorce after 2 years of marriage and having 2 children together. In her petition, she claims not only her husband's infidelity, but also his utter immorality. Allegedly, he pressured her to attend debauched parties and participate in immoral activities. 50 pages of the lawsuit quickly leaked to the press, becoming public knowledge almost instantly. Chaplin, of course, denies all accusations and asserts that those who know and love him will dismiss the rumors. Furthermore, he believes that the media storm is part of a deliberate conspiracy against him. Throughout his life, he will repeatedly become convinced that there are forces determined to ruin him. In reality, nothing poses as much of a threat to Chaplin as he does to himself. One reason for the theories surrounding the star stems from his troubles with the tax authorities. These issues almost align with the marriage scandal. The authorities initiate an investigation against Chaplin for tax evasion. He promptly halts all current filming and rarely leaves his office at the studio. Chaplin fears the investigation. Nothing frightens a person who has risen from the slums more than the possibility of losing money and reverting to poverty. Ultimately, Chaplin's personal bureaucratic issues are resolved, but not without repercussions. The star's lawyers negotiate a settlement with the tax authorities and finalize the lawsuit with Lita Gray. This divorce turns out to be the most expensive in the country's history. Chaplin pays his ex-wife nearly $1 million, half directly to Lita, and the other half allocated for their minor children. Following these events, Chaplin's reputation suffers significantly. However, by the end of the 20s, a far more serious issue looms over the filmmaker, one that could potentially ruin his career. In 1927, the film The Jazz Singer is released. This marks the first film in history to feature synchronized sound. In simpler terms, audiences witness for the first time how an actor's lip movements align with their words. This represents a monumental advancement for cinema. For silent films, it's akin to a death sentence. The rise of sound will signal the end of many stars' careers. For Chaplin, this is doubly troublesome. The tramp cannot speak. The concern isn't just the strong accent of the British actor. Rather, the magic of his character's global appeal lies in its universality. Chaplin's films resonate in the United States, Japan, India, France, and other regions because they can be understood without words. On one hand, Charlie insists that sound in cinema is merely a passing fad, arguing that dialogue disrupts the action and that audiences will soon grow weary of this new gimmick, allowing films to revert to their silent roots. On the other hand, he appears to acknowledge the emerging technological threat. It's worth mentioning that technology isn't his forte. He rarely employs effects from different camera angles and hardly moves the camera at all. His primary focus is the emotion conveyed by the actor. Nonetheless, Chaplin pauses the filming of his new movie to experiment with incorporating sound. After a few weeks, it becomes evident that the outcome is disastrous. This pertains to the film City Lights. The story behind its production could itself serve as a compelling film. Given the context and production challenges, City Lights was anticipated to be the master's greatest failure. The first issue is already apparent. Work on the film begins just as sound cinema starts to take off. However, by the time City Lights is complete a few years later, sound films will have become the cornerstone of theater repertoires. The second problem is the Great Depression, which triggers a significant economic crisis in the country. Not only are people disinterested in going to the movies, but they also likely won't want to watch a character whose defining trait is poverty. The third problem involves Chaplin's perfectionism coupled with the absence of a script. Let's explore this in more detail. In summary, the film follows this storyline. The tramp encounters a flower seller on the street who is blind. She mistakenly believes that the impoverished tramp is a millionaire. In another case of misunderstanding, the tramp saves the life of a drunken stranger who turns out to be quite wealthy, and they form a friendship. However, when the rich man sobers up, he entirely forgets about the tramp. When he drinks again, they become inseparable once more. One day, the tramp reads in the newspaper about a doctor from Austria who can restore sight. But a substantial amount of money is needed for this procedure. He wishes to help the flower girl financially and tries various methods, but ultimately falls back on his connection with the wealthy man, who agrees to supply the necessary funds. The girl receives the money while the tramp ends up in jail, as the police mistakenly believe he is a thief. The film is incredibly humorous and genuinely poignant. I detailed the plot for a reason. It becomes evident that the film's driving force lies in one of the opening scenes, where the girl mistakes the tramp for a millionaire, realizing he understands she cannot see. It may sound straightforward, but capturing just this one scene took 2 years and 340 takes. Initially, they needed to find an actress for the leading role. Chaplin fortuitously meets Virginia Cherrill at a boxing match. She isn't an actress. Rather, she is a socialite living on alimony from her ex-husband. Chaplin offers her the role, and she agrees, not out of a passion for cinema, but simply because she thinks, why not? Filming begins. Chaplin lacks a coherent script, yet he has a vision of what unfolds in each scene. They do one take, then another, then a third, and soon surpass 100. For Cherrill and the crew, every take appears identical, but Chaplin presses on. Something isn't quite right. Something isn't clicking. Perhaps the issue lies with the actress. For example, she needs to deliver a simple line to the tramp. "Flowers, sir." However, in Chaplin's view, she never says it as required. Eventually, Cherrill quips, "What difference does it make?" it's not my movie? This is a reasonable question, yet for Chaplin, there is a significant difference. After almost a year of filming, he decides to replace the actress, tries several others, only to conclude they aren't right for the role and pleads with Cheryl to come back. They reshoot the first scene, and after 300 takes, Chaplin experiences a revelation. The sound of the car door closing signifies to the girl that the stranger who bought her flowers is a millionaire, which allows the rest of the story to flow. Since City Lights is not my film being released during the age of sound cinema, Chaplin concludes that a lively soundtrack is essential. Who could do it better than me? Charlie wonders. He isn't a composer and lacks formal musical training. Instead, he simply hums melodies from his imagination to a hired professional, who then transforms them into musical notation. In January 1931, City Lights premieres in theaters and experiences remarkable success. Despite the Great Depression, the lack of dialogue from the characters, and the years of production along with a massive budget, audiences queue for screenings and applaud afterward. City Lights is celebrated as one of the greatest masterpieces in world cinema, and its final scene is often hailed as the best ending in film history. This iconic moment occurs when the tramp is released from prison and encounters the very girl. Her sight has been restored. Through touch, she recognizes her savior and realizes he is the tramp, not a millionaire. Now able to see him clearly, Chaplin's face in close-up conveys a profoundly intricate blend of emotions, joy that the girl can see and simultaneously sorrow. He understands that they cannot be together because he remains just a tramp. On one hand, City Lights stands as an undeniable triumph. On the other, it represents a peak after which it becomes impossible to reach greater heights. Perhaps, deep down, Chaplin senses this reality himself. At just over 40 years old, Charlie begins to experience pronounced mood swings. He engages in new romantic pursuits and grows increasingly anxious about preserving his fortune and his appearance. Frequently, he asks his assistant if he looks good for his age. It's not merely a whim. Who among us hasn't posed that question to their mirror after hitting 30? As Chaplin grows older, he begins to focus on broader issues such as the global struggle against poverty. He even devises his own plan, which he presents to politicians in the United States and Britain, but they dismiss him. Many aspects of Chaplin's proposal are idealistic and impractical at first glance, such as the idea of a single global currency. Typically, when a prominent creator delves into political concepts, it tends to result in underwhelming ideas and can, at worst, derail their entire creative output. We are all familiar with such directors. Fortunately, Chaplin manages to sidestep that fate. While his next film won't match the success of City Lights, it will nonetheless stand out as one of his major masterpieces. Furthermore, Chaplin is able to convey his critique of the industrial capitalist system artistically through the film Modern Times. He invites a young actress, Paulette Goddard, to take on the leading female role. Apparently, due to Chaplin's known preferences, she claims to be 17, even though she is actually 22. A romance blossoms between them. Eventually, they marry, and their union proves to be creatively and personally fruitful. Paulette will aid Chaplin in building connections with his children from previous marriages and will star in 2 of his last genuinely popular films. Regarding modern times, Chaplin had long considered creating a satire addressing the industrial system and the dehumanizing labor in factories. This direction was a natural evolution of his body of work. From his earliest films, Chaplin consistently presents a negative portrayal of wealthy characters, often depicting them as drunken or unpleasant individuals. In this sense, Chaplin aligns with socialist beliefs. However, his socialism is not a political manifesto. Rather, it represents a creative empathy for those on the margins of society: single women, homeless children, the impoverished, and other marginalized groups. All of these figures serve as the primary characters in his works. It is not by chance that the actor is frequently compared to British writer Dickens, who explored similar themes and characters. This comparison exemplifies Chaplin's internal contradictions. On one hand, he espouses a lyrical form of socialism. On the other, he is a wealthy man who primarily fears losing his fortune. At one point, in a moment of exasperation, he asserts that he could easily forego luxury and survive on a few $1,000s a month. This notion is, of course, quite amusing. First, because at that time, that sum was certainly considerable, and second, because Chaplin could not realistically sustain himself on such an amount. In any case, Modern Times proves to be a highly successful film despite being released 5 years after Chaplin's previous work in 1936. Yet, in essence, it is not truly my film. While there are ostensibly sound moments, they do not equate to synchronized sound. The audience has already grown accustomed to hearing speaking actors on screen, and the Great Depression is still in effect. One of the film's central themes is indeed unemployment and poverty. So, if it achieves popularity despite these challenges, isn't that a testament to its greatness? Many film historians accurately regard Modern Times as Chaplin's last remarkable work. However, there is another film we must not overlook, which requires us to rewind the story a bit. In April 1889, just 4 days apart, 2 boys were born in Europe. Both would achieve great popularity and amass numerous fans. Ultimately, one would become a beloved figure around the globe, while the other would symbolize evil. The first is Chaplin, and the second is Hitler. Nearly 50 years later, in 1938, Chaplin comes across an article in a newspaper stating that the German leader has banned the actor's films in Germany, allegedly because of their resemblance to him. Chaplin perceives Hitler as a madman, yet at the same time, he finds him quite comical. He resolves to create a film about him, leading to the production of The Great Dictator, a bold parody of Hitler. The scene featuring the dictator dancing with a globe-shaped balloon becomes iconic. The film debuts in 1940, by which time Hitler has already invaded France, making it evident that the circumstances are anything but humorous. Regardless, Chaplin's most expensive film becomes one of the most financially successful of his career. It is essential to recognize that by the late 1930s, the genre of political parody did not exist. Filmmakers did not mock leaders. This contributes further to the unprecedented nature of The Great Dictator. On one hand, many critics do not regard the film as great. Chaplin does regress somewhat, as the movie features a great deal of simple comedy, with frequent running and humorous scenarios reminiscent of his earlier works. On the other hand, The film will forever hold its place in history thanks to Chaplin's remarkable intuition. He began working on the film in 1938. At that time, Hitler was not yet considered a figure of evil. He was actually a popular political leader with a significant following. Chaplin later acknowledged that he was, of course, unaware of concentration camps and other atrocities back then. Otherwise, he would never have created such a film. The Great Dictator is also noteworthy as it marks the first instance in which Chaplin speaks directly to the audience. However, in every other aspect, it still doesn't feel like my film, released during an era when progress had moved irreversibly forward. Chaplin recognizes that he is becoming outdated even in terms of film production. Technologies have transformed drastically over the decades, yet Chaplin's methods remain unchanged. He is a hero of silent cinema. In the early 1940s, Chaplin turns his attention to public activism. He actively engages in meetings to raise funds for the Soviet Army and advocates for the Allies to open a second front. While these efforts are undoubtedly noble, they also lead to significant challenges. In the perception of many, Chaplin increasingly comes across as a communist. Soon, this will weigh heavily against him in the film industry. Communism is not the sole factor undermining Chaplin's public image. He continues to engage in romantic affairs, goes through divorces, and marries quite young women. Following his divorce from Goddard, he has a fling with actress Joan Barry. These relationships are not only surrounded by constant scandals, but also pose a risk to Chaplin's freedom. In 1944, Barry files a lawsuit against Chaplin, claiming she is pregnant with his child. Moreover, the actor faces accusations of sexual slavery. This sounds far more alarming than what actually took place. At that time, a peculiar law indicated that if you financed a woman's travel to another city and subsequently had an intimate relationship with her there, you could be looking at over 20 years in prison. The intention behind the law was to tackle the issue of female sexual slavery, but its enforcement was clearly lacking. In this instance, Chaplin believes it to be a conspiracy against him, and there is some truth to that. Young FBI Director Edgar Hoover has long held animosity and suspicion towards Chaplin because of the actor's communist sympathies. Hoover exploits the situation to tarnish Chaplin's public image as much as possible, and overall, he succeeds. Although the actor's lawyers win the trial, the damage to his reputation is beyond repair. By that time, Charlie is married once more. His new bride is Una O'Neill, the daughter of the renowned American writer. Guess how old she is? 18. In 1947, a new film called Monsieur Verdoux premieres. This marks perhaps the first significant failure in the actor's long career, as the film generates less revenue than its production cost and fails to resonate with both critics and audiences. Chaplin is convinced that this is due to his damaged image. However, as history reveals, the reason for Verdoux's lack of success is actually not his reputation. It's just not one of Chaplin's best films. Nonetheless, the actor is right to acknowledge that at that time, his image is indeed in a precarious state. By the close of the 1940s, the primary concern is the accusation of anti-American sentiments. Following World War II, American society begins to seek out potential communists, including those in the film industry. Consequently, this leads to disruptions in the careers and lives of several hundred filmmakers, with some even facing imprisonment. Chaplin is, naturally, under suspicion due to his films, public appearances, support for the Soviet Union during the war, and the fact that after 30 years of living and working in the United States, he has yet to obtain American citizenship. This raises suspicions. Chaplin attempts to defend himself publicly by declaring that he is a citizen of the world, that he has never been affiliated with any political party, and that he has never voted. Overall, this is accurate. As previously mentioned, the actor's leftist views were more sentimentally romantic than political. However, all his attempts at clarification fail to yield the desired results. Chaplin even chooses to cancel his trip to London, as he genuinely worries that he will be denied an entry visa to the States afterward. Charlie is attempting to produce a new film, but it's more challenging than before. This difficulty arises not only because the previous film flopped, but also because many in the industry are reluctant to collaborate with him. Unpleasant remarks can be directed at him in public spaces, and at one point, someone even spat on him. In essence, Charlie Chaplin was essentially canceled long before it became a common occurrence. Nonetheless, in 1952, the new film is completed. Limelight is, in some ways, an autobiographical film about a clown in the later stages of his life. Chaplin chooses to attend the premiere in London, where he remains popular and adored by audiences in Europe, unlike in the United States. Before he leaves, he transfers most of his American assets, such as property, stock shares, money, and more, to his wife, a U.S. citizen. He is concerned that he may be denied entry into the country and risk losing his fortune. Following this, Chaplin applies for an entry visa to the United States and receives approval. However, just 2 days later, while sailing across the Atlantic, he is informed that his entry visa has been revoked and that he can only acquire a new one after facing an interrogation. Consequently, Chaplin decides to remain in Europe with his wife and 4 children. The Chaplin family settles near Lake Geneva in Switzerland. The actor and director's last 2 works will be produced in Europe, both of which meet with unfavorable reactions from audiences and critics, particularly in the United States. In his final film, A Countess from Hong Kong, audiences do not see Chaplin on screen. He takes on the roles of director and screenwriter behind the scenes. In 1972, he receives an invitation to America to unveil a star bearing his name on the Walk of Fame. Charlie is apprehensive, fearing that people will protest against him in the streets. However, after 20 years, the scandals and controversies have faded from memory, and instead, people fondly recall the actor's outstanding films. Chaplin is met with applause at the Oscar ceremony at the age of 83. Despite his advanced age, deteriorating health, and the underwhelming success of his recent films, he continues to work and even plans new projects. 2 years later, he passes away in his sleep at his home in Switzerland. During his years in Europe, Chaplin visited London several times, wandering through the neighborhoods where he spent his childhood, locations familiar to every viewer of his films. Many of the street scenes in Chaplin's works were designed to mimic the streets of his childhood in London, while the interior sets mirrored the rooms where he lived with his mother and brother. The Tramp may have been just a mask and a persona, but the films themselves were unquestionably the true embodiment of Charles Spencer Chaplin.